From Produce to Politics, the story of George Zegouras. George Adam Zegouras was born on December 22, 1937, in Arcadia, Greece, to proud parents Adam and Maria Zegouras. He came to Belleville in 1954 and began working for the Dominion grocery store before he and his brother Peter launched their own wholesale food company, Belleville Foods, in the mid-1960s. He also had the family restaurant on Dundas near Foster and several rental properties around town. George's political career began in 1973 when he was appointed to the city council. He remained as an alderman until 1980, until sworn in as mayor of the City of Belleville in 1991. He was a successful businessman and entrepreneur. He again held the mayoral office after the election of 2000. He was a council member for 21 years and Belleville's longest-serving mayor. His legacy will live on with the Zegouras family's donation of one of Belleville's heritage buildings at Victoria Avenue and Church Street to the Healthy Space Housing Project. This 4,000-square-foot Victorian home, complete with a two-story carriage house, was built in 1880 by a local physician and will be home for those with complex physical and mental health-related issues. Please join me in sharing some memories of this very unique, charismatic individual who did so much for our community. This story was told by Chris Millett, the City Hall reporter.
As a sitting city councilor and a longtime news reporter whose beat was City Hall for more than 10 years, the walls of the place whisper to me every time I enter that stunning edifice. The spirit filling the place is the former mayor and my dear old friend George Zegouras. We weren't always pals, as I'd spared him no mercy when penning a piece or two for the Intel, in which I thought old Georgie Z's leash needed a little tug. But those were few and far between. See, George was a guy who was very hard not to like. Whenever I walked Front Street with George, I was astounded that he knew almost everyone he met and remembered everyone's name. That, my friends, is the mark of a successful politician, and George had charisma in spades. He could be nasty, even occasionally spiteful for a political foe, but one rarely saw him publicly vent that bit of his spleen. He saved the shiv for much more subtle and spare moments. He wore his heart on his sleeve for those who came to him, either for some segment of the city or group, individual or agency needed attention from City Hall. He later had one more go-round as mayor in 2000, and that's when I came to know him as a tireless advocate for the City of Belleville. I good-naturedly told him he made my life hell to decipher some of his, quote, Georgisms when writing up an address or quoting him in print. When George finally left politics for good in the early 2000s, they threw a Greek-themed clam bake for him at the Greek Hall, and a bit of a roast was part of the program. Nervously, I decided it would be spits and giggles to poke fun at some of the Georgisms we scribes had noted over the years. I printed up placards to phonetically recall some of his gems. Sidewalks for sidewalks, Tanganenga for Tanganega, and other familiar Georgisms. The Zegouras table, with the whole family in tow, was seated right below the dais, and I was worried they'd take offense. The total opposite occurred as I looked down to see the entire table howling with laughter, wiping away tears they'd shed, sharing their mirth. Whenever he'd asked me to visit his office on Campbell Street, with the walls festooned with keys for various rental apartments and houses he had around town, I'd walk in and ask, "How's my favorite slumlord?" The answer was always a laugh, an unprintable epithet, followed by a greeting to sit your ass down. What's going on in town these days? George was, like many politicians and journalists, an inveterate gossip, and he had to have the latest, always. George and his beloved wife, Diane, would host their fabled Christmas receptions at their East Hill home. I learned where you stood on the pecking order in town if A, you got an invitation to the reception, and B, if you were an A-list guest or a B-list guest. I learned there were two parties. One began at 3 p.m. and guests were shuffled out at about 5 to make way for the evening reception. That'd be the A-listers, who came in around 6 or 7 p.m. Designated as a B-lister at first, I never saw the evening event. Their kids acted like coat hangers, greeters, waiters, and waitresses for the events, but they were all great at it. I'd heard the drinks were more robust and the food a notch above par for the evening soiree, but I never found out on my own. That big old house was also home to some fine civic receptions, where Diane would furiously set a feast for visiting dignitaries. I recall the towering figure of Herr Werner Dietz, Lord Mayor of Lahr, Germany, and his delegation whenever the friendship flights were in Belleville. When I mentioned to the recent delegates from Lahr, who came here to Belleville earlier in May 2022, that I remembered Herr Dietz, their eyes grew large at the mention of the legendary mayor of their Black Forest city in Germany. When Diane died in 1999, it was as though the soul had been pulled from George's chest. I recall that morning at the Intel newsroom hearing the sad news. I volunteered to go to George's home to retrieve a photo of Diane for our Page One news story on her passing. I met a grief-stricken George and his cousin Peter, who was there trying to console him, his beloved George. It was too much for the three of us, actually, and we wept in each other's arms at the profound sadness we were feeling at the moment. Oh, he was gregarious, funny, and could be your best friend or your fiercest enemy. But George Zegouras left a significant, indelible mark on this city, and I was proud to call him my friend.
Thank you so much, Chris, for, in your own words, sharing this beautiful tribute to your friend George Zegouras with us. His plaque stands proudly at the gates of the George Zegouras Market Square and reads, George Zegouras is remembered as being a tireless supporter of the City of Belleville, with countless hours spent promoting the city wherever he went. His charisma with citizens and visitors alike is a major hallmark of his legacy. He loved the City of Belleville and its people. George Adams Zegouras, 1937-2012.